I'm sorry, there's a small hitch. It looked like data necessity audio. Okay, now this is a quick history of the evolution of work with men in India, and I'm sure there are similar evolutionary histories around work with men in other countries. In India, as far as we have been able to make out, the first intervention with men started in Mumbai. The group was called MAVA, Men's Action Against Violence and Abuse, and this started as a result of a small item in the Indian Express newspaper, which called for men who believe that gender discrimination and violence should be is not only a women's issue, and this newspaper ad led to a lot of men writing into a post box, and then we had Mama was formed. Today, Mama exists in Mumbai. Many of you must be knowing the name of Harish Sadani, who's involved with Mava. At the same time, they started an annual magazine called Purusha Sambhana, and this Purusha Sambhana created a literary platform to discuss issues around masculinity. Personally, my work started in 1998. In 1998, through work with male youth on gender and development issues through Sahyog in Uttarakhand, we went on forward around training of male medical officers, health workers in various states, including Mumbai, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Haryana. This was taking on from the fact that ICPD, the International Conference on Population and Development, created a special niche for working with men and boys. Again, out of Maharashtra in the early 2000s, started a set of roundtables and dialogues to understand masculinity and how working with men actually helps. Women's Empowerment Society is a clearly feminist group. Um, Even at the same time, Rahul Roy, who was one of the leaders in taking this piece of work in South Asia forward, was involved in a project called Let's Talk Men. And this created 4 films on South Asian masculinities. These films are most probably available online. There was one out of India, one out of Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So these films discuss how masculinities affect men. The Indian film, as far as I remember, was called Mahjong. I forget the names of the other films. In 2002, I was involved in starting up an intervention in UP called MASA, or Movement Action for Stopping Violence Against Women. This was clearly a feminist intervention and had a lot of women helping us design and implement this initiative. Around the same time, there was an intervention around male sexual and reproductive health in Mumbai slums. This was done by International Institute of Population, IIPS, Population Studies. Subsequently, it sort of became the Yari Dosti project, and Kuro sort of implemented that. The Yari Dosti project went forward, and sort of ICRW became a partner around James and Pioneer are still ongoing in different parts. The FEM network was started in India around 2008, and work with men and boys now started getting seeded in different parts of the country. At the same time, groups across South Asia came together to form SANAM and the South Asian Network to address masculinities, and 2 rounds of fellowship programs were organized through SANAM. You may be knowing many of the SANAM fellows. There is a Facebook of SANAM fellows which I would encourage you to look at. We can all get connected. And then, of course, in 2014, there was the second Men Engaged Global Symposium, which was organized in Delhi, brought together 1,200 people from 93 countries. And this symposium was co-hosted by women's groups from India. And today, as we speak, in 2016-17, an EXA national campaign has been launched. This campaign, the objective is to engage with men and boys to address gender injustice. And this campaign has, as we speak, been across 1,000 villages or more across 100 districts. So this is the evolution of work that is broadly in India. Now, what have we learned uh, from this work? Now, this is extremely important because what we have learned is that attitude change is probably easy, but there's a huge range of changes in activities, starting from basic things like participating at home in various domestic chores, helping in the cooking. I'm still using the word helping, not taking the full responsibility. Getting water, fetching water, uh, washing the clothes, washing dishes. These are native activities that men have now started doing. Men have also started in childcare. Childcare, pregnancy care, delivery care, and child care, infant care, and across the range, what we have found in our work that 40 to 60% of men have started engaging in this work once they become part of these kind of activities. But more important, what we find is joint reproductive decision making, and something that has been extremely important in our findings has been that even though men don't use sterilization, vasectomy has not really become popular, but consistent condom use has become extremely high in many of the places that we have worked. And as a result of that, there is much greater spacing. We have found that the first child is being born much later in our work in Maharashtra. We have found it also in our work in Madhya Pradesh. And of course, that is leading to reduced fertility, which is a big concern in India. Of course, there is reports of reduced violence, reduction in coercive sex, and the other thing we recently found out through a study which was exclusive done on women is that because of better communication between partners, women now are not anxious about painful sex, they're not anxious about coercive sex, and women have now started enjoying sex much more. And women are also communicating their own sexual desires to women, to men. At a stage of younger girls, what we found is that this kind of work actively works on reducing dropouts. It increases, educational attainment and staying in school, high school, and beyond. Of course, this has a direct impact on early marriage, and this early marriage reduction happens through collective conversation with the family which was planning early marriage. And young boys, groups of men start getting involved. We found that groups of men have also become involved in ensuring that girls can have better access to schools through special bus service, or boys ensure that girls now can ride a cycle, accompany them, so that they can come to the school, which, as you grow higher, the school becomes further and further from home. What we also found is, which was quite surprising, is joint registration of property. And this was found as a large scale change in about 100 villages that we work in Maharashtra. And men were not resisting the fact that they would make both property, which was domestic property, and land cultivation as joint ownership. We found increasing participation of women in panchayat. We found women's participation in economic opportunities. So a whole range of economic and social benefits were there. At the same time, because our work focused on equality, what we have found is caste-based discrimination, and to the extent of increasing temple entry and support for intercaste marriage was found in our work in Madhya Pradesh and in Maharashtra. And in Maharashtra, there have also been reports of men who were contemplating suicide, reaching out to other men to discuss their problems. And many of you may know that Marathwada area is an area where suicides are very common after crop failures. So these are issues that we found, and interestingly, in Maharashtra, we've also found men who are in these groups now starting sharing their concerns about their own sexual and gender identity. Now, these are a whole range of group changes that we have found. Some of it which helps women, some of it which helps families, some of it which also helps men individually. When we see changes in so many dimensions, what we see is what I would like to call transformative gender change. Because here, not only are traditional gender roles changing, but the entire patriarchal distribution of power between the sexes is being challenged and new solidarities of social solidarities are being created. So this is what is the potential gain and the potential benefits that we can see in our work around women's rights when we engage women and boys. Another question that keeps coming up from time to time is what is the individual man gain? Okay, there's a lot of gain which you can show for, let us say, women, you can show a lot of gain for overall community, but what is the gain at the level of the individual man? And here what we find, and this is consistent across our work, starting from Uttar Pradesh to recent work in Madhya Pradesh, in between Maharashtra and Rajasthan as well, is that consistently men have said that they cherish the intimacy and the communication with their spouse that emerges as a result of their new approach to relationships. That has been the most important thing. Classically, the Indian society is sex segregated. Women's life is within the home, men's life is outside the home. Even though families are becoming much and more and more nuclear oriented, but what happens because of each other's concern and at the same time, their relationship, including their sexual relationship, becomes much more mutual and reciprocal. Much more caring relationship with their children, particularly with their daughters. Daughters are no longer a problem that they have to get rid of as soon as they're 14. So there is a much more caring relationship even with sons. Of course, another thing that we find is alternative relationship which grows in the community because these are men who are taking action. And there are other men who have relationships with women who may be distressed. These men come to these men or new gender champions for support. And so there is an increasing acknowledgement about their formal and informal leadership. What we found is once this leadership starts getting acknowledged, these men start getting into positions of leadership, either in Panchayat, in the Village Health and Sanitation Committee. In Maharashtra, there's something called the Transformative, and members from our group start becoming members in these community mechanisms. There's been a friendship between men. As you will probably know, men's relationships is primarily about bragging, not sharing weakness. But what we have found that these groups in which you can share issues of concern, the relationships between men become much deeper and more meaningful. Of course, there are a few losses. And these losses are that there is alienation with your natal family. Your father, your mother, they can't often reconcile to the changes that are taking place in the man. And the man, of course, now seen as a unit of the land. And this the family does not like. In some cases, the increasing social leadership roles has meant that these men become more and more engaged in this kind of work. We know a couple of people, of course, started NGOs in our work in UP. In Madhya Pradesh, they joined panchayats, they joined Kantamukti groups, and consolidated leadership. So you also have increasing sort of on your time. And the free time that we see, you must spend with your family, there is a pressure on that free time as well. So these are some of the gains and losses. But all the men that become part of this program have usually said their gains are much more. And there is actually no insecurity of losing power and privilege and control, which we often feel would be the first loss. So the point now is how do over these 15 odd years, we've been doing a series of studies trying to understand how this process of change takes place. What we have been able to understand, and this is what our operational theory of change is, that at any point of time, there are many men in the community who really do not feel very comfortable with the levels of violence and the levels of discrimination that is there on women and the levels of compulsion there are facing men. So there is a hidden discontent. I'm calling it hidden. It's also silent. They don't usually make their discontent uh, evident even when there are cases of violence. So they are providing silent endorsement to a hegemonic, to a violent social order. However, within society, and this is very clearly, I'll give you an example, what we found in Maharashtra is in the same village, there can be extremely strong Maratha feeling and uh, followers of Lingayat sort of subgroup who follow Vasavappa, who is an old saint from the Middle Ages who talked of an egalitarian society. So there are alternative social ideals which are present. We found the same in Eastern UP. There were people who cherished Kabir, and at the same time, they were extremely conservative, Brahmanical beliefs at the same time. So, in South Asia, in many places, you will find alternate social ideals. So, what our work is to understand the context, what is the level of discomfort, what is the level of dissonance or different social ideals in that same place. Now, what we do is to understand that we often do some public activities to identify those people who become uncomfortable, who come forward and say, "Aisa nahi hona chahiye, it should not be like this, this is wrong." Now, these people become the core group through which you start your training and reflection on male privileges to understand and realize the value of equality. We have found that if you only talk of women's status, men become extremely defensive. So it is not a good idea to talk about women's disadvantage because men also face a lot of disadvantages because of intersectional issues of caste, economic poverty, etc., etc. But if you talk of intersectionality and look at multiple disadvantages at the same time, men understand the fact that they have many more privileges compared to women. And if we can have a collective understanding of feeling bad when you are in a subordinate position, you can realize the value of fairness and equality and equity, and that helps the process of reflection to start. So, what we do is have an elaborate training program in which the issue of power, the issue of privilege, the issue of equality is identified, and then men take individual and collective action to sort of start small steps for change. So there is a sort of issue of curricular pedagogy, reflection, participation, which we have to follow. And these are many of these are available. And if you would like, we can share these. Many of them are online. And we strongly believe that for an individual man to take action can be difficult because there are many forces in society which will try to keep him in his previous position when he is not so understanding, so sort of reflective. So we believe that you have to have a men's group. That group becomes a support group for each other as well as a collective for joint action. And this together with action at the PRI, ANM, ASHA, PHC creates a situation in the village where there are many collective decisions taken to espouse and promote gender equality through understanding various policies, various laws, and various schemes. So, this has been over time the framework that we are using in our work with men. And this, we believe, encourages transformative change. So, what are the key elements of this transformative change? So, the most important thing is understanding power. Understanding power as bestowing privilege and as making people feel subordinate. And the fact that this privilege needs to be addressed if we have to move people from subordinate positions. And this action for moving people from privilege from subordinate to a position of equality requires giving up some privileges. And it's difficult, but our work says once there is an understanding that you have certain subordinations, you have certain privileges, you can start working on it. Now, this shift of understanding about power and privilege is what we call a consciousness shift. And this consciousness shift means a clear understanding of equality, equity, justice, and accountability. The accountability is important because accountability means somebody can ask you a question about your motives, about your actions, and about whether you feel you're doing what you think is right. Increased analytic capacities and increased interdependence, meaning collective approach. We strongly believe that transformative change has to include both individual and collective action and taking agency for change. And this leads to a whole range of new actions, individually and collective, at the personal and public or community life. And these are based on your independent interpretation of social relationships. So, what we have found is we could start with a project on health, but once people start thinking independently based on their own interpretation of their reality, they start taking action on multiple social hierarchies, multiple power hierarchies, and changes start happening in different domains from where you initially were aiming at. So we were aiming at, let us say, changes in health. And what we found is changes in property rights. What we found was changes in women's participation in panchayat. So these were completely different, but based on the collective interpretation of the new men's group that had started understanding social hierarchies. So this is a summary of how consciousness change can be theorized. On the left is current situation and how that moves. Today, what we say is there is gender discriminatory social norms which lead to explicit control of women, use of coercion and power. And what we see as a result of that is gender discriminatory practices, gender-based violence, etc., etc. As you move through this process, the first sort of thing that comes through is concern for women's safety. Now, concern for women's safety is different for women's autonomy. So, what you have here is the control becomes invisible, and probably you move towards what could be called a paternalistic support of women, in which gender based violence is challenged, but much of the discrimination is seen as essential for protecting women. Now, this is what we feel is this is probably a step in the pathway. And it is important to identify this step because you have to push the group beyond that. You have to push the group to more improved relationship which is based on respect. And this happens, and this is what we found is in gender based work, this is probably a little easy because your close women relatives are sometimes your own sister, your own mother, your own spouse. Now, you benefit from improved relationship with that woman. So, it is possible to move protectionism to sort of developing a new aspiration for the woman concerned, and that relationship with the woman who is in your home becomes a mirror to understanding your concern for women outside. And that is where consciousness change takes place, when the respect for equality and consciousness for justice becomes a much more universal phenomenon than only limited to your wife, your daughter, your mother. And then you find changes in many dimensions, the transformative change that I was referring to, where you start independently interpreting various discriminatory practices and take collective action to change them. Now, this is what we have found is possible when you're working with men. The important question is, as you start working with men, women start getting more and more space, and the women's empowerment, women's spaces and autonomy that have been created and which men usually stop, that pressure is released, and women can now flower in their own empowerment. So, what do we think in terms of this as a change in community aspiration? Now, what we see is the individual man that we focus upon, but the individual man whose training that we invest the most energy works with a group of community mobilizers. Now, this group of community mobilizers then starts working individually and collectively with their community to foster a change. Now, as you start working with community and public institutions in the implementing of uh, women supporting policies and norms, a new set of community behaviors starts getting established in society. This leads to what we are calling a group consciousness change. And as this new community behaviors start reinforcing change, because women are now also supporting this change and men are also supporting this change, a new set of community aspirations get established, and what we could say is a new set of social norms around when should women get married, how much education should girls have, whether it is appropriate to do sex selection or not. Those core issues of gender discrimination start getting discussed in society, start getting challenged in society, and new norms start emerging. This is broadly what we have found is possible when you start working with men. Now, my final slide is then how do we deal with hegemonic masculinity and how does it change into this kind of transformation? When we see hegemonic masculinity, some of the sort of characteristics of that state is desire to exercise power and control, to use coercion and force over men, women, and justified by various patriarchy and social systems. This is where we are. When we have a consciousness change, what we are saying is there is an understanding that power is coercive, that privilege is only enjoyed by a few, and that it needs to be shared, and you develop a respect for equality, and you develop an understanding of the interrelationship between different social systems that create hegemony or hierarchy. When this consciousness shift takes place, then your transformative behavior change starts. And that is transformative behavior in the family, challenging gendered social norms in the community, promoting increased autonomy for women, and collectively in sort of working for different social norms, including greater solidarities in the community. So this in broad is the sort of pathway of change, the theory of change that we have been able to identify through our work in the last 15 years. What we are doing in this training is trying to pull together these experiences along with experiences of others and create a sort of opportunity for us to learn from each other. So I'll stop there and wait for your feedback. Okay, I'll start once again. There are a couple of questions that we received earlier, and we have one question in terms of that was asked in the course of the chat. Um, one question, of course, the question which came up in the course of the chat was, what is the next step after the course? Um, as a course, this is supposed to be complete in itself. We will be looking for ways in which we can stay connected and video there. We can stay connected. We can stay connected, and I would certainly encourage you to join different country level men engage groups. There are country level men engage groups across the world. I'm saying across the world because we have participants from different areas across the world. And individually, we can put you in touch with organizations which are part of the Men Engage in your country. This way, you can stay connected, learn from others' lessons as well as contribute your own. And we can all create a smaller community of concern. There is another question which says, which asked, can a real man exist in the context of violent hegemonic masculinity? What is the meaning of the term man up? Um, I have received another question, which all of us can see. I will address that, the area of which class does it belong to, and area where what opportunities exist. Okay, I'll take that a little later. I will address the question of what is a real man. You see, there is something called the hypothetical real man and the real man. The society has created certain qualities which are supposed to be masculine. But if you go out and start asking men whether they fall in that category, you will find that many men don't fall into that category. So I would say the real man is a myth that is being promoted by society, and that becomes a vehicle for pushing men into a particular stereotype that men probably at most points don't feel very comfortable with. And what we have to do is constantly explore these cracks in what men want to be and what men are expected to be. And that is a space where the interventions can play a role. So I would strongly encourage that in your work, whenever you work with men, try to find that crack, try to find that level of discomfort that men face individually, because that discomfort becomes an opportunity for the intervention to become successful. There was a second question on how to combat homophobia. Now, homophobia is not a disease, it is a socially constructed attitude, and very clearly, the socially constructed attitude, at least in South Asia, comes from the British Empire in many ways. Because historically and even culturally, South Asia is much more homosocial, meaning groups of same sex live here comfortably, socialize comfortably, are sharing the same physical space. So, to a certain extent, there is a level of homoeroticism in South Asia, which means there is a level of sexual give and take, if not sexual relationships. So this exists as a sub subcontext in our region. So if somebody is homophobic and can recognize that they are homophobic, I think the the challenge has started, because you have realized the fact that some kind of socialization has affected you and your, let us say, more cultural homosocial being. Now, the fear of homophobia is something to do with probably the fear of being sexually abused. But once we start becoming respectful, and any form of sexual relationship is a respectful sexual relationship, then the idea of homophobia may slowly disappear. I say may because the more and more you talk about your fears, the more and more you can conquer it. If you have friends with whom you can discuss this in uh, I would say, in a level of confidentiality, in a level of privacy, this is the best way to combat, in some ways, homophobia. Now, there was a question that came up is whether this belongs to, or these interventions are specific to a particular class. Um, I would say no, or I would say yes and no. Uh, Number one is it is the poor with whom we do most of our developmental interventions, right? And unfortunately, even gender based interventions are done mostly with the poor. However, in our work with school and college, especially college and university, we have had some experience. I will not say extensive experience, but we have had some experience of working with lower middle class groups as well. Uh, to enter into the middle and upper middle class groups for this intervention is difficult. If you ask me, that is one area which we are also looking at to crack. How do you take this intervention into the more affluent classes? Because the more affluent classes actually have much more privilege. And that is where probably the abuse of privilege takes place the most. So it is desirable that we work with them, but it's not easy. Uh, the Ek Saath campaign that we have launched in India is trying to find ways to approach the slightly higher classes. Recently, um, we did a campaign in Delhi, which was targeting the ridership of the metro rail, and we have been able to sort of recruit about 2,500 potentially interested people with whom we will start working. I'm glad to learn that Chintan has done some work with students in an elite IB school in Mumbai. So it is important to do this work. Schools and colleges may be an easier entry into this class group. Fantastic. Chintan shares that teachers and students are comfortable about talking with homosexuality. Um, yes, unfortunately, some words get uh, certain taints, and probably the word gay or fairy in some cases has become like that. And probably the idea is to make more respectful use of the word. It's going to be a challenge. And everyday sexism, how that's a big issue of everyday sexism. We've been discussing how we could start working with workplace as institutions, because everyday sexism is a widespread phenomenon in these institutions. Again, we're trying to find a way. It's not easy. Some of us have been discussing how do you create efficient and congenial workplaces as being the framework, because what has happened in workplaces is that the sexual harassment at workplace law has made people very defensive about talking about sex, and sex is only being thought of as something which is potentially harmful, coercive, or leads to violence. But that is not so. Unfortunately, we have sort of these ghastly um, events or ghastly incidents of sexual violence. We have to talk of consent, we have to talk of respect. Certainly, a Facebook group can be created. Uh, the only concern here is that please don't ask us to be the moderators and managers of the Facebook group. It should be a participant managed Facebook group. We will, from my side, I promise, I will be a member, and I'll encourage all the other mentors to join this as well. So, if any of you would like to take this up, welcome, and I'll let Apurva know, and Apurva can work with you to set, know this, to set this up. That's a fantastic suggestion. Any other suggestions? Patriarchy and psychology. Well, I don't know too much about psychology myself, but what the brilliance of patriarchy or any such ideology is that people who are in positions of subordination, they internalize the subordination as much as is possible, and that helps this to continue over generations, if not thousands of years. So yes, probably there is a very strong relationship in the way patriarchy and these ideologies get embedded in one's psychology. Certainly, we are willing to give more time for the assignments till, let us say, till the end of this month, 31st of May. The only concern that we have is we want the mentors want to be free of this responsibility within a finite time frame. It's not to say they want to be free in the sense that it's a bother. It's in the sense that they would like to keep time aside. They had kept time aside. It's a question of coordinating the time that we have kept. Uh, uh, I know it's been a little delayed. End of this month, please feel free, but I think the end of this month should be seen as the deadline, even though I don't like the word dead. So, should we take this to be the end of this face-to-face interaction? I've seen your face, some of your faces, you've seen mine, and hopefully we will run into each other sometime or the other. Good luck with the rest of your assignment, and hope to stay connected through the Facebook. Bye bye. Okay, last question. Prashastika, over to you. Hmm. Well, Prashastika, there are many potential working opportunities as because many of these this approach is becoming more and more popular in the development scenario. So I don't think that should be a problem. List of organizations working in this field can be made available. Please see the Menengage website. There is a website called menengage.org, which is a global website. Martin has a question, so you can go to your part of the world, you can go to your country and see what organizations who are working on that field. So please, I'm writing the name of the organization. Um, that is a website which can give you a lot of additional resources. You're welcome. So bye bye for now, and let's keep our connection through the Facebook so we can talk to each other and the community can grow. As we speak, there's a face-to-face training that is taking place in Bangalore, and we will also share um, sort of we can make it a common community between the people who took this course online and the people who are taking it face to face as well. So goodbye for now.